Welcome to Fast Pace, the new growth, leadership and management podcast featuring Josh Phegan and Dean Mackie. We wanted to peel back the layers on what happens in the world of fast-paced real estate agencies, from new leadership models to the management challenges we all face each day. This is about a new era in the estate agency sector. Rapid changes to business models, service lines, remuneration and growth present the greatest opportunities that we've ever seen. Sit back, get inspired, grow your skills and reimagine what's possible with Fast Pace. Every Friday, wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Josh Phegan Digital. One of the great conversations, in order to have a phenomenal business, you got to think about systems and you got to think about people. Dean, this is going to be an incredible podcast because today we're going to talk about managing people in a chaotic era. We've never seen it like this before. A world that fundamentally changed on a dial through COVID, ton of changes, the inflammation of what's actually happened with information, the whole idea about what's happening in terms of digital, social, speed of relationships, speed to trust, the number of people that just expect that someone else is going to do it for them. Tell us a little bit about managing people. I want to see all of your tips and tricks and what you're doing to manage people through this chaotic era. What do you reckon?
Thanks, Josh.
Well, I'm sitting back taking notes, so let's go.
Yeah, thanks, man. Look, I think you're right. There is certainly reduced predictability and increased uncertainty every other day of the week, right? And, you know, I think the digital overlay of our world has really amplified that. I think that the uncertainty that applies with so many macroeconomic interconnectivities these days, I think catches people unaware. Because if we just think we're living in our own little bubble, we're not. One thing changes somewhere in the globe, and we're all impacted by it.
So geopolitical event,
all of it,
speed of information,
all of that, and then expectations of people based upon the experience they're having in other areas. And you know, we're not immune to it. You know, everyone's costs are rising. Things are people are pivoting. You know,
inflation.
They're doing stuff. People having to get innovative. So there's so many things around. But I think it's also an incredible opportunity to build even stronger and more adaptable teams. And the emphasis on being adaptable. And I think that's the biggest challenge for us at the moment is because we've got so much change afoot and so much uncertainty afoot that sometimes people to think, oh God, I'm exhausted by this. I just can't, you know. But I think if you can build a bit of muscle memory and some resilience and an attitude and a culture of we need to learn, we need to grow, we need to adapt, we need to be curious, we need to be innovative, then that's going to serve you well in the current context, right? Anything else than that, and you're going to get stuck and you're going to get caught out. And I'm finding, you know, sometimes I have high-performing agents who go, look, man, I don't need to change anything because I'm doing all right here, you know. But, you know, dripping on a rock, over time I'm seeing people go, well, actually, I'm now seeing another way, right? On how do I catch up, right? I think we can only resist things for so long. But I think in this environment, as a leadership person or team or whatever, there's probably four or five areas I think you need to focus on. And I think, firstly, the more you can provide a clear vision and provide some certainty at a time at which things are uncertain, then that becomes an attractive thing for people. So, you know, clarity of focus and goals to guide the team through uncertainty is probably the first thing and important thing that I think is crucial is being on that. Because in addition to everything else, if you're not clear about direction and vision, then how do you expect anybody else to be? And you're just going to have a whole bunch of people running in different directions and no one's going to be aligned and it's going to be harder and harder to get anywhere. So having real clear focus around your vision and having some clarity around that. I think one of the other parts for me is how do you empower your team, right? Because you can't continue to control everything when things are moving really quickly, right? So you've got to trust in the human capital and the human equity you got in really good people to say, I need to be able to trust you and empower you to do things, provided they're in alignment with the vision and the values and the mission. Because if you're clear about that, then people can make decisions that are aligned. And if you haven't given clear focus around that and they're not certain about your vision or your purpose or whatever, then they're going to make decisions that aren't in alignment. And then all of a sudden you're going to be running around cleaning up a mess that someone has unintentionally created just because they weren't clear on where the boundaries were, right? So I think that's really important. And two other factors, I think, you know, in the current environment, you know, when it's uncertain, people want you to give them a more safety, you know, and this whole concept of psychological safety has been coming up a lot more around, you know, where people can feel safe to speak up, they can share ideas, they can admit if they've made a mistake, they can, you know, that sort of environment is really important. So having a safe environment that values abundance, right? not so much the scarcity piece, because scarcity actually creates less of that psychological safety is crucial. So for me, and then the last piece, I think that's tied all together is if you've got a culture in the current environment that's resistant to learning, you're going to struggle because you're running back into an environment where people are constantly resisting improvement, change, and or new tools or new resource, whatever it is. Then that's a pretty exhausting space to be. And then what it does, it distracts the whole joint. So having an ability to fuel continuous learning, where you've got a culture where people embrace learning and they know that they've got to adjust their approach and skills is really, really crucial. So I reckon in this uncertain environment, the more you communicate, hold regular check-ins and those sorts of things, up your communication, up your connection, make sure you're celebrating wins, and learnings. Being okay that people can take risks, right? That's the sort of leadership style I think is crucial in this environment. Being agile, being adaptable, showing the team. Sometimes people think there's a bigger problem than what it is. But when you step it back and go, well, let's just look at that problem and break it into smaller little chunks, bite-sized chunks, actionable chunks that we can do something with over the next 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, people feel like they can get into momentum and they feel like they're getting more in control of their destiny as opposed to feeling at the effect of all of this uncertainty and all of this change and turbulence and, it's too hard. So making it simple is really, really crucial in the current context.
The interesting thing I think about people are going through life stages. So what does that look like? Coupling up and having children and kids moving out of home and maybe being on their own again and all of those things that go on. People go through life events. Unfortunately a health event or something happens to a loved one or something happens in the family. And I was watching the documentary Stutz, which is about Phil Stutz and Jonah Hill, the actor. And the interesting thing about that is that he said, okay, great. What I want you to do is I want you to go and draw a square. And inside of this square, we're going to go and call this the foundations. Good diet, great exercise, good relationships, food over your head, some great accommodation over your head, some basic money in the bank. And think about those foundations as being core. And then what we're going to do is we're going to draw like an imperfect circle well around that square. And because it's imperfect, it's the naturalness, the flow. It's the movement of the environment of the day, government policy settings, personal things that are going on, you name it. He says, if you concentrate on getting the foundation right, you can withstand any storm. And so you start thinking about, okay, great. Well, before I start blaming the environment and the economy and the government and blah, 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 what am I doing to make sure that my foundation is super solid? And if I can get those foundations right about go to bed early, wake up early, don't get involved in stuff you shouldn't, then that's actually going to promote that. And there was an interesting thing. I was reading a book the other day, which is, how to be successful in the second half of life. And, it's actually quite interesting because I say the second half of life is from 35 years onward.
All right.
Yeah, so from 0 to 35.
I'm thinking it's post-50s.
Yeah. No.
Are we going to 100?
You're already here, man. And this is the basic idea.
Sunset of
So the basic idea is that all of your cognitive skills are built between 0 and 35. And then from 35 onwards, you apparently have significant cognitive decline. So I didn't know if you were going through this, but apparently you're going through it.
That's why I can't remember mine.
So the interesting thing about it, though, is that they said, okay, great, but what you can do is you can jump to wisdom. And so the interesting foundational piece that I started thinking about, okay, great. What people fail to mention about a great career is that it can be the most stable thing in your life. So even when everything else is going sideways, you can still always turn up. And this is what I always say that, real estate's the greatest lover of all time because it's always there. And you know what? If you need something extra to do, there's always something extra to do. But learning how to have that as a really stable element. And the interesting thing that Stutz wrote about is he said, beyond the making money phase of your life, he goes, the thing that literally will always stay with you is the ability to be creative. And creativity can go on forever. So even at your 100 mark, you can still be incredibly creative, even if you're not necessarily involved in a day-to-day running of a real estate practice. And that's really the job, is to start to say, okay, great. When we're starting to think about getting the foundations right and starting to think about how we're going to grow you as a person, how do we actually make sure that we've got you in a position that you understand the importance of what a career does to build out that level of stability and to make sure that you're getting yourself in this position that you start really thinking clearly that to manage people in the chaotic era, your job is to pull back and say, okay, what's happening in their life stages? Have they had a life event? What's going on to get their foundations right? And how do I create literally adaptability and agility around the environmental changes to allow them to respond, and in a really powerful way so they can perform. And your job is to bring in and to create an environment that allows an incredible level of performance with the conditions of the day.
Yeah. I think you're spot on, Josh. I think if you can teach people that foundation will set them up. It's funny. I was only telling my daughter the other day about the famous story of John Eales, right? I don't know if you remember when he was kicking a goal for I think it was World Cup. I can't remember the exact detail. There's my cognitive decline. but the truth was I was fortunate enough to actually be around at an event. I might have spoken at an event, and John Eales was there, and I sat near him, and I asked him about when he kicked that goal in the World Cup, I think, to whenever it was, and I think he kicked it from the sideline. And there's a lot of pressure around that. And my daughter's got this speaking event. She's all stressed about having to get up in front of. And I told her the story about, so I think I pulled up the footage and sort of showed it to it. And I said, look, he said his words were, I didn't feel any stress at that moment, because I thought, what was that moment like? He goes, to be honest with you, I as much as, I don't know if I believe it entirely, but he basically, his words were like the fact that I had created certainty around how to kick that ball. I knew exactly how many steps I needed to take. I practiced it 1,000 times on the sideline. I knew I was a high chance of getting it. I blocked out all the noise, and I just went through my routine, and my routine set me free, right? So he created safety and security around not just surviving, but flourishing in an environment that really, he misses that kick and they don't win, right? But I think it's the same in our lives, right? The more you get those foundations right, it takes the stress away. It makes it easier. And so we as leaders in an uncertain environment need to create more certainty for people, improve the communication, be adaptable, create a great learning environment, and everybody wins.
All the growth comes by being uncomfortable.
Yeah.